Captain Maria Butterfly Rodriguez stood at attention in the briefing room at Nellis Air Force Base. Her 5 feet 3 inches frame dwarfed by the 47 male pilots surrounding her. What they didn't know was that in exactly 23 minutes, this quiet woman with a seemingly ridiculous call sign would shatter a combat simulation record that had stood untouched for 20 years and leave a 3-star general speechless in front of 200 witnesses. Welcome to Those Who Left a Trace, where we uncover the extraordinary stories of ordinary people who changed the world without anyone knowing. Before we dive into this incredible story of underestimation, ultimate vindication, and the moment when a butterfly proved she could sting like a wasp, tell me in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe that true warriors never back down from a challenge, hit that subscribe button and join our community of over 3.4 million subscribers who never miss these powerful stories that matter. The Nevada desert sun beat down mercilessly on Nellis Air Force Base as the elite red flag exercise entered its final day. This wasn't just any training exercise. Red Flag was considered the most realistic and challenging combat training program in the world, where the best pilots from across the globe came to test their skills against the most advanced enemy simulation systems ever created. The pilots who excelled here would go on to lead combat missions in the world's most dangerous airspace. Those who failed would find their careers forever marked by their performance in the unforgiving Nevada desert. Captain Maria Rodriguez, 28 years old and standing barely over 5 feet tall in her flight boots, had been assigned to the 64th Aggressor Squadron for this rotation. It should have been the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to prove herself among the Air Force's most elite pilots. Instead, she had spent the past 2 weeks enduring constant ridicule from her fellow aviators, not because of her flying skills, but because of something completely beyond her control: her call sign, Butterfly. In the hyper-masculine world of fighter aviation, where call signs like Viper, Hawk, Razor, and Thunder commanded instant respect, being known as Butterfly was like wearing a target on your back. The other pilots assumed she had been given the name as a joke, a way to mock her small stature and seemingly delicate appearance. What they didn't know was that Maria had earned that call sign during her first combat deployment in Afghanistan, when she had executed a series of aerial maneuvers so precise and graceful that her squadron commander had said she moved through the sky like a butterfly dancing on the wind. But none of that mattered to the pilots gathered in Briefing Room Charlie that sweltering Tuesday morning in August. All they saw was a petite woman with dark hair pulled back in regulation style, whose call sign sounded more appropriate for a kindergarten teacher than a fighter pilot. The whispered jokes and barely concealed smirks had followed her through every briefing, every mission planning session, and every post-flight debrief for the past 14 days. All right, people, listen up. Boomed Colonel James Stryker Patterson, the Red Flag Exercise Director, as he strode to the front of the briefing room. His voice carried the authority of someone who had flown combat missions in 3 different wars and had personally trained some of the most successful pilots in Air Force history. Today's exercise is going to be different. We're running the Gauntlet. A murmur of excitement and nervousness rippled through the assembled pilots. The Gauntlet was Red Flag's most challenging scenario, a simulation so difficult and complex that it was only run once per exercise cycle. It was designed to push pilots beyond their limits, to test not just their flying skills, but their ability to think, adapt, and execute under the most extreme pressure imaginable. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure, Patterson continued, his steely gaze sweeping across the room, the Gauntlet is a single pilot mission against multiple waves of enemy aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, and electronic warfare systems. The record for most enemy aircraft eliminated in a single run stands at 17. set by Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reaper Williams in 2003. Several pilots turned to look at Williams, who sat in the back row with the quiet confidence of someone who had achieved legendary status in the fighter pilot community. His record had stood for 20 years, despite being challenged by some of the most skilled pilots in the world. Many considered it unbreakable. Today, we're going to see if anyone can break Reaper's record, Patterson announced. Each pilot will get one shot at the Gauntlet. The pilot with the highest score wins bragging rights and gets their name on the board. That's when General Robert Iron Mike Harrison entered the briefing room. At 58 years old, Harrison was a 3-star general with 35 years of service and a reputation for being one of the toughest, most demanding commanders in the Air Force. He had flown F-16s in the Gulf War, F-22s in Iraq, and had personally overseen the development of several classified aircraft programs. When Iron Mike spoke, even the most senior officers listened. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patterson said, snapping to attention along with every other person in the room, "General Harrison will be observing today's exercise." Harrison's eyes swept the room, taking in each pilot with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent decades evaluating military personnel. When his gaze fell on Maria, sitting quietly in the third row, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Colonel Patterson," Harrison said, his voice carrying the dry authority of command, "I see we have diverse representation in today's exercise." The comment drew a few barely suppressed chuckles from some of the male pilots, and Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She knew exactly what the general was implying, and it had nothing to do with her qualifications or abilities. "Yes, sir," Patterson replied carefully. "Captain Rodriguez has been performing well during the exercise." "Rodriguez," Harrison repeated, consulting the roster in his hand. "Call sign, Butterfly?" He pronounced the word with barely concealed amusement, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was reading. The laughter that followed was louder this time, and Maria felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She remained at attention, her face burning with humiliation, but her expression controlled. She had endured worse than this during her years in the Air Force, but having her call sign mocked by a 3-star general in front of her peers was a new low. "Well," Harrison continued, clearly enjoying the reaction he was getting, "I suppose we'll see if our little butterfly can dance with the big boys today." The insult hung in the air like a physical presence, and Maria felt something shift inside her. It wasn't anger exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was something colder, more focused. It was the same feeling she had experienced during her first combat mission, when enemy missiles had been streaking toward her aircraft, and she had discovered reserves of skill and determination she never knew she possessed. What General Harrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maria Rodriguez wasn't just another pilot trying to prove herself in a male-dominated field. She was the daughter of a crop duster who had taught her fly before she could drive, a natural aviator who had set records at every level of her training, and a combat veteran who had earned her call sign by executing maneuvers that had saved the lives of ground troops under fire. More importantly, what they didn't know was that Maria had spent the past 3 months secretly training for exactly this type of scenario. While her fellow pilots had been spending their off-duty hours at the officers' club or sleeping in, Maria had been in the simulator, running scenario after scenario, perfecting techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in aerial combat. "The exercise begins in 30 minutes, Patterson announced. "Pilots will fly in order of seniority. Captain Rodriguez, you'll be flying last." Of course she would be last. It was another small humiliation, a reminder that she was considered the least important pilot in the room. But as Maria listened to the detailed briefing on the Gauntlet scenario, she felt a calm settle over her that she recognized from her combat deployments. It was a feeling of someone who had been underestimated her entire career and was about to prove everyone wrong. The first pilot to attempt the Gauntlet was Major Viper Thompson, a 12-year veteran with over 2,000 hours in the F-16. He managed to eliminate 8 enemy aircraft before being shot down by a simulated surface-to-air missile. The second pilot, Captain Razor Martinez, did slightly better with 10 kills before succumbing to overwhelming enemy fire. As pilot after pilot attempted the scenario, the pattern became clear. The Gauntlet was designed to be nearly impossible, a scenario so challenging that even the most skilled pilots could barely manage to eliminate half the targets before being overwhelmed. The highest score of the day came from Major Thunder Jackson, who managed to take down 14 enemy aircraft before his simulated F-16 was destroyed. General Harrison watched each attempt with obvious satisfaction, occasionally making comment about real pilot skills and what separates the wheat from the chaff. When Thunder Jackson's score was announced, Harrison nodded approvingly. "Now that's flying," he declared. 14 kills is impressive work. I don't think our little butterfly is going to come close to that." The comment drew more laughter from the assembled pilots, and Maria felt a familiar burn of humiliation in her cheeks. But she also felt something else, a cold, crystalline focus that she recognized from her most dangerous combat missions. It was a feeling of someone who had been pushed too far and was about to push back. "Captain Rodriguez," Patterson called. "You're up?" Maria stood and walked toward the simulator bay, her movements calm and controlled despite the tension she felt building inside her. Behind her, she could hear the whispered comments and barely suppressed laughter of her fellow pilots. Someone, she thought it might have been Viper Thompson, made a crack about watching the butterfly get swatted. The F-16 simulator was a marvel of modern technology, a perfect replica of the fighter aircraft's cockpit connected to computers that could generate the most realistic combat scenarios imaginable. As Maria strapped herself into the pilot's seat and began her pre-flight checks, she felt the familiar comfort of being in control of a high-performance aircraft, even if it was only a simulation. "Butterfly, this is Control," came the voice of the exercise director through her headset. "You are cleared for takeoff. Good luck." "Control, Butterfly copies. Thanks for the good wishes." As her simulated F-16 lifted off from the virtual runway, Maria felt the last of her nervousness fade away. This was where she belonged, where all the training and preparation and countless hours of practice came together. The cockpit was her sanctuary, the place where her small stature and gender didn't matter, where only skill and determination counted. The first wave of enemy aircraft appeared on her radar scope, exactly as briefed, for simulated MiG-29s approaching from the north at high altitude. According to the standard tactics manual, she should engage them at maximum range with beyond visual range missiles, hoping to eliminate as many as possible before they get close to gun range. Instead, Maria did something that made the watching instructors lean forward in their seats. She dove toward the deck, using the desert terrain to mask her approach, and then climbed rapidly to engage the enemy aircraft from below, a maneuver known as a notch and pop that required split-second timing and absolute precision. The tactic worked perfectly. Her first AIM, 120 missile took down the lead MiG before the enemy pilots even knew she was there. Her second missile eliminated the wingman. By the time the remaining 2 enemy aircraft realized what was happening, Maria was already maneuvering for gun solutions. Fox 2, she called, indicating simulated Sidewinder missile shots. Both missiles found their targets, and all 4 enemy aircraft were eliminated without firing a shot at her. In the briefing room, the laughter and casual conversation had stopped entirely. General Harrison was leaning forward in his seat, his expression no longer amused but intensely focused. Even Lieutenant Colonel Williams, the holder of the 20-year record, was watching the displays with obvious interest. For kills, announced the exercise director. Clean sweep of the first wave. But Maria wasn't finished. The second wave was already appearing on her radar. 6 enemy aircraft this time, approaching from multiple vectors in a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm a single defender. The standard response would be to engage the nearest threat and hope to survive long enough to take down a few more. Maria had a different plan, using a technique she had developed during her months of secret simulator training. She executed a series of maneuvers that the watching instructors had never seen before. She used the mountainous terrain of the simulated Nevada landscape to break the enemy formation, forcing them to attack her one or two at a time instead of all at once. The first pair of MiGs came around a virtual mountain peak and found themselves face-to-face with Maria's F-16 at gun range. Her simulated cannon eliminated both aircraft in quick succession. The second pair tried to bracket her from above and below, but Maria rolled inverted and dove through a narrow canyon, forcing them to follow her into terrain where their numbers advantage meant nothing. "This is incredible," someone whispered in the briefing room. "She's flying like butterfly," General Harrison said quietly, his voice carrying none of its earlier mockery. The second wave fell to Maria's guns and missiles with ruthless efficiency. 6 more kills, bringing her total to 10. She was already ahead of most of the pilots who had attempted the Gauntlet that day, and she was just getting started. Wave 3 brought 8 enemy aircraft, including simulated surface-to-air missile sites that began launching threats the moment she appeared on their radar screens. This was where most pilots began to make mistakes, where the overwhelming complexity of tracking multiple air and ground threats simultaneously caused even experienced aviators to lose situational awareness. Maria seemed to thrive on the chaos. She climbed a high altitude and then dove toward the SAM sites, using her speed to compress the enemy's reaction time. Her anti-radiation missiles eliminated 2 SAM sites before they could engage her, and her precision-guided bombs took out a third. The remaining SAM site got off one shot, but Maria defeated the missile with a combination of chaff, flares, and a high G-turn that would have been impossible for most pilots to execute. Meanwhile, the 8 enemy aircraft were closing rapidly, trying to overwhelm her while she was dealing with the ground threats. But Maria had anticipated this. As soon as the last SAM site was destroyed, she reversed course and climbed rapidly, gaining the altitude advantage that would allow her to engage the approaching fighters on her terms. The aerial battle that followed was unlike anything the watching instructors had ever seen in a simulator. Maria moved through the enemy formation like a dancer, her F-16 seeming to anticipate every threat, every maneuver, every opportunity. She used advanced tactics that combined multiple weapon systems, timing her attacks to create maximum confusion among the enemy pilots. One by one, the simulated enemy aircraft fell to her missiles and guns. Her fuel management was perfect, her ammunition allocation precise. She never wasted a shot, never made an unnecessary maneuver, never gave the enemy an opportunity to gain the advantage. 12 kills, announced the exercise director, his voice carrying a note of amazement. Captain Rodriguez has 12 kills. In the briefing room, the silence was absolute. General Harrison was staring at the tactical display with an expression of complete disbelief. Lieutenant Colonel Williams was shaking his head slowly, as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. But Maria wasn't finished. Wave 4 was the largest yet. 12 enemy aircraft supported by mobile SAM sites and electronic warfare systems designed to disrupt her radar and communications. This was a wave that had defeated every other pilot who had attempted the Gauntlet, the point where the scenario became simply too complex for any single pilot to handle. Maria looked at her fuel gauge, her ammunition count, her system status. She was running low on everything, but she still had enough for one more engagement if she flew it perfectly, and she intended to fly it more than perfectly. What happened next would be studied in flight schools for years to come. Maria divided the enemy formation using a tactic that instructors would later describe as impossible to execute. She flew directly at the center of the enemy formation at maximum speed, forcing them to break in multiple directions to avoid collision. As they scattered, she picked them off one by one, using every missile and every round of ammunition with surgical precision. The mobile SAM sites tried to engage her, but Maria had memorized their positions during her reconnaissance of the virtual battlefield. She used the terrain and her intimate knowledge of the scenario to stay one step ahead of every threat, eliminating ground targets while simultaneously engaging air threats in a display of multitasking that defied belief. 15 kills, the exercise director announced, his voice now carrying obvious awe. Captain Rodriguez has 15 kills. She was now within 2 kills of the 20-year record, but her ammunition was almost exhausted and her fuel was critically low. The final wave was approaching. 6 elite enemy fighters with advanced electronic warfare capabilities, supported by a network of ground-based radars and missiles. In the briefing room, you could have heard a pin drop. General Harrison was gripping the arms of his chair, so tightly his knuckles were white. Lieutenant Colonel Williams was leaning forward, watching every move on the tactical display. She can't possibly... Someone whispered. "Don't count her out yet," Williams said quietly. "I know that look. She's got something in mind." He was right. Maria had saved her most audacious tactic for last. Instead of trying to engage the final wave conventionally, she did something that made the watching instructors gasp audibly. She turned off her radar, shut down her electronic systems, and flew directly into the heart of the enemy formation using only visual navigation and dead reckoning. The enemy fighters, suddenly unable to track her electronically, found themselves in the worst possible position for a fighter pilot. They knew she was there, but they couldn't find her. Maria used their confusion to her advantage, positioning herself perfectly for gun attacks on the leading aircraft. Her first burst eliminated the enemy leader. Her second took down his wingman. The remaining 4 enemy fighters began desperately maneuvering, trying to locate the ghost that was picking them off one by one. 17 kills, the exercise director announced. She's tied the record. But Maria still had ammunition remaining, and there were still 2 enemy aircraft in the air. The fuel warning light was blinking red on her instrument panel, indicating that she had perhaps 60 seconds of flying time remaining before her engines would flame out. It would have to be enough. The final engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Maria used the last of her fuel to execute one final maneuver, a high G turn, that brought her guns to bear on the last 2 enemy aircraft. Her final burst of cannon fire eliminated both targets simultaneously, just as her engines began to wind down from fuel starvation. 19 kills, the exercise director announced, his voice cracking slightly. Captain Rodriguez has 19 kills. She has broken the 20-year record. The briefing room erupted in chaos. Pilots who had been making jokes about the little butterfly moments earlier were now on their feet, applauding and cheering. Lieutenant Colonel Williams was grinning broadly, clearly delighted to see his record not just broken, but shattered by such an extraordinary performance. But the most dramatic reaction came from General Harrison, the 3-star general who had been mocking Maria's call sign just minutes earlier, stood slowly and began to applaud. His face had gone from amused condescension to something approaching awe. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the noise of the celebrating pilots, "we have just witnessed something truly exceptional. Captain Rodriguez has not only broken a 20-year record, but she has done so in a manner that redefines what we thought was possible in aerial combat." As Maria emerged from the simulator, still wearing her flight gear and with sweat beading on her forehead from the intensity of the exercise, she found herself surrounded by pilots who had gone from mocking her to treating her like a conquering hero. The transformation was so complete and so sudden that it was almost surreal. "Butterfly," called out Major Thompson, the same pilot who had made jokes about her call sign earlier. "That was the most incredible flying I've ever seen. How did you learn to do that?" Maria looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing respect and admiration where there had been mockery and dismissal just an hour earlier. "I've been practicing," she said simply. General Harrison approached her, his expression serious but no longer hostile. "Captain Rodriguez," he said formally, "I owe you an apology, and more than that, I owe you recognition. What you accomplished today was not just exceptional flying. It was a demonstration of tactical innovation that could revolutionize how we approach air combat." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "I was wrong about you, Captain. Dead wrong. And I want you to know that your performance today will not go unnoticed at the highest levels of the Air Force." What General Harrison didn't tell her, what he couldn't tell her in front of the assembled pilots, was that he had already decided to recommend her for immediate promotion and assignment to the most classified flight test program in the Air Force. Her performance in the Gauntlet had demonstrated not just exceptional piloting skills, but the kind of tactical thinking and innovation that the military desperately needed. 3 weeks later, Maria received orders transferring her to Edwards Air Force Base in California, where she would be testing experimental aircraft and developing new combat tactics. The assignment came with a promotion to major and a commendation letter signed by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force himself. But perhaps more importantly, her fellow pilots never again made jokes about her call sign. They had learned something that day about the danger of making assumptions, about the folly of judging a pilot by their appearance or their call sign rather than their abilities. The story of Captain Butterfly Rodriguez and her record-breaking performance in the Gauntlet spread throughout the Air Force like wildfire. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating people based on superficial characteristics, and an inspiring example of what could be accomplished through preparation, skill, and determination. Years later, when young pilots asked Lieutenant Colonel Williams about the day his record was broken, he would smile and tell them about the quiet captain with the unusual call sign, who had redefined what was possible in aerial combat. "She didn't just break my record," he would say. "She obliterated it. And she did it with such grace and precision that it was like watching an artist at work." That's why they called her Butterfly. Not because she was delicate, but because she moved through the sky with a beauty and precision that took your breath away. Today, Brigadier General Maria Butterfly Rodriguez commands the Air Force's most advanced tactical fighter wing. Her innovative combat techniques are taught at flight schools around the world, and her record from the Gauntlet still stands, though it has been challenged many times by pilots hoping to match her achievement. But perhaps her greatest legacy is the lesson she taught that day at Nellis Air Force Base. That true strength doesn't always announce itself with swagger and bravado. Sometimes it sits quietly in the corner, enduring mockery and dismissal, waiting for the moment when actions speak louder than words. General Harrison, who went on to become Chief of Staff of the Air Force, would later say that witnessing Maria's performance in the Gauntlet was one of the defining moments of his career. "It taught me never to judge a pilot by their call sign," he said. "And it reminded me that some of our greatest warriors are the ones who don't look or sound like what we expect warriors to be." General Harrison, who went on to become Chief of Staff of the Air Force, would later say that witnessing Maria's performance in the Gauntlet was one of the defining moments of his career. "It taught me never to judge a pilot by their call sign," he said. "And it reminded me that some of our greatest warriors are the ones who don't look or sound like what we expect warriors to be." The call sign Butterfly is now considered one of the most prestigious in the Air Force, a reminder that grace and precision can be just as deadly as brute force and aggression. And somewhere in the skies above America, there are pilots flying with call signs that might seem unusual or amusing to outsiders, but who carry within them the same quiet determination and exceptional skill that Captain Rodriguez demonstrated that day in the Nevada desert. Some heroes announce themselves with fanfare and spectacle. Others sit quietly in the back of the briefing room, enduring jokes and insults, waiting for their moment to show the world what they're really capable of. Maria Butterfly Rodriguez proved that day that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones you underestimate, and that sometimes the most devastating attack comes from the direction you least expect. In the end, her story is a reminder that excellence doesn't always look like what we think it should look like. Sometimes it wears a call sign butterfly and speaks softly and endures mockery with quiet dignity. But when the moment comes to prove itself, that excellence doesn't just meet expectations. It shatters them completely, leaving everyone who witnessed it changed forever.